Before he was El Presidente, mi papa loved to fish. We would go out on a boat, just like this, and we would catch the fish, and then release them. He would say, it's not always about your stomach, mijo. It's about the challenge. Except when he caught a big, fat, juicy marlin, he was too proud to let that fish go.
Si Tirano! You have poisoned Yara! You have poisoned your soul!
I have caught a very big fish today.
History is said to repeat itself, first as a tragedy and second as a farce. Karl Marx, a man lionized for his infamous philosophies, quoted this immortal phrase. Unfortunately for us though, he never contemplated the third or fourth repetition. Dissecting the video game industry can often bring you to some interesting conclusions, especially when we consider the word repetition. In the real world, it can often lead to perfection, or at the very least a sound understanding of what you're aiming to achieve, such as mastering a new skill. However, in the gaming world, one could be forgiven for assuming that repetition could lead to a better experience and/or the evolution of a long-running series, as publishers learn what their audience is looking for, allowing the developers to deliver a fine-tuned experience, drawing upon years of consumer feedback. And yet, we frequently find the opposite is true, as publishers routinely ignore aspects of previous titles that provided players with a satisfying experience. Repetition, unfortunately, can often lead developers down a dark trail of laziness, forced to develop games under an imposed copy-paste mentality. AAA gaming is notorious for reusing content, recycling games, and pushing out multi-million-dollar franchises that aim to do nothing more than encourage us to spend more money without any enhancements to the experience. Ubisoft has perfected the art of retelling the same story across several franchises for decades now. Assassin's Creed is the biggest example. Although the series did enjoy a rejuvenation with Assassin's Creed Origins, as it lent more into its RPG elements, this was ultimately short-lived as Assassin's Creed Valhalla released as an exhausting, sluggish, and bloated experience. Bloated is by far the best word to describe modern-day Ubisoft titles, with the Far Cry franchise exemplifying this far better than any other. A franchise unable to escape the bonds of past glories, seemingly incapable of reinvention, like a dog forever chasing its tail. Pointless busywork with no payoff, little progression, and arduous gameplay has unfortunately overshadowed the once great series that is forever marred by the memory of Far Cry 3. Leading up to launch, Far Cry 6 was touted as a new beginning for the series. A return to a tropical, exotic location gave fans everywhere flashes of previous triumphs. Unfortunately, the Ubisoft open world formula is on full display with all its shame and shortcomings highlighted for the gaming world to see. A game that is full of pointless busywork, minimal progression, and worst of all, a game that has shown all it can offer within the first 4 hours. Make no mistake, I'm not exaggerating in the slightest. Everything you do in the first 4 hours of your time in Yara is what you'll be doing and experiencing for the next 30 to 40 hours. There are no new mechanics, no interesting twists or gameplay strategies to hide what can easily be described as Ubisoft's laziest entry to date. It's high time we talked about Far Cry 6, so grab yourself your favorite cup of coffee and let's crack on. Now, for the sake of clarity, I want to be completely open regarding my history with the Far Cry franchise. I've never played Far Cry 3. I have played roughly 5 hours of both Far Cry 4 and 5. Far Cry 4 bored me, and Far Cry 5 was, for the lack of a better word, shit. So you might be wondering, why the hell did I play Far Cry 6? To be honest, it was the location first and foremost. I love a tropical setting, perhaps it's the Queenslander in me, but whatever it is, a tropical location, especially in an open world game, will always hook me in. Second, it was the casting of Giancarlo Esposito, a fantastic actor who is perfectly suited for a Far Cry villain. And lastly, because my local EB Games was running a special where I could pick up Far Cry 6 for 30 AUD after trading in 2 games I no longer cared about. This may give you the impression I'm about to rip into Far Cry 6 simply because it's clearly not my cup of tea. However, my review isn't as negative as you may be thinking. In fact, there's a decent amount of good here. It's just hard to focus on when the core of the game is faulty. First, some housekeeping. I'm playing this on a PlayStation 5 with the day one patch installed and the 4K texture pack enabled. At the time of recording, there has been only one major patch for Far Cry 6, and quite frankly, the updates don't address any criticisms I have, so I feel very comfortable releasing this video now. Funny enough, Ubisoft may finally be catching on to the feelings players have about their games, since I've received 2 surveys regarding my experience with Far Cry 6. Hopefully, this will lead to real change in the development of future titles, although I don't think so. This discussion isn't going to be as structured as I'd normally like. As I look over my notes, it's plain to see that with every positive I'd like to share, there's 2 negatives to follow, and the further along I read, the more negatives there are. As such, this review will be more of a rant than a scripted essay. Without further ado, let's start, and we'll begin with perhaps the most blatant issue. That's the AI. So many moments of my playthrough are ruined because of the AI issues. Not the usual dumb or broken AI problems either, but in fact it's the opposite. These enemies can pinpoint your location from a mile away, finding you even atop cliffs, hidden inside buildings and under bridges. The AI clearly have been taking lesson from Agent 47's briefcase. Enemies can shoot you from fuck knows where. Honestly, in some fights you'll be hit without even seeing a soldier. And then there's the enemies that respawn right in front of your eyes. So, okay, this respawning issue was truly horrible. Throughout Yara, there are certain locations that you can never completely clear of enemies. Fair enough, it makes sense in the context of the game. After all, you're a guerrilla unit going up against an army. Where I take issue is how the enemies respawn even as you're clearing out the area, literally popping into existence in front of your very eyes. It's one thing for the enemies to return to the base after you've left, but it's another thing entirely for them to instantaneously spawn behind you. On another occasion, I was clearing out an air defense section, carefully taking out enemy by enemy with a sniper rifle. Once they were dispatched, I hopped down to blow up the turret, and just like that, 4 soldiers respawned meters away, instantly killing me. Another instance found me spying on Jose Castillo on his private island. Not only did random guerrilla fighters pop into life, but enemy soldiers continued to spawn indefinitely. Luckily for me, my game crashed because I felt like I was in a Willy Wonka nightmare, forever doomed to endure this endless parade of soldiers. These aren't rare issues either, but ridiculously common, as if by design. It's a funny thing too. As I write the script, I think back on the enemy AI in Cyberpunk 2077 and how they'd flank you, hide behind cover, and formulate basic strategies to provide the player with a fun combat loop. But here in Far Cry 6, one of the most established first-person shooters in the video game industry, the enemies you face are more akin to a pack of foxhounds, charging you as a group and then following your trail to the end of the bloody earth. Now, that's one negative out of the way, but don't you worry, I do have plenty more to come where that came from. But for now, let's balance the scales a bit with a positive, and that's the graphics. They're fantastic. I mean, they really are beautiful. We may not be talking about current gen graphics along the lines of your Demon's Souls remake or Forza 5, and they won't be sweeping away any awards anytime soon, but being able to see across the entire chain of islands is certainly worth of praise. The lush tropical biome of Yara pops off the screen, and the lighting effects at sunrise and sunset are truly something special. These moments really showed how talented the developers at Ubisoft are and just what they're capable of. Exploring the island of Yara felt even more satisfying when you're greeted with beautiful sandy beaches and the dense, foreboding rainforest. It's a shame because once the sun does set, everything becomes so dark that moving around becomes a ridiculous slog. This has to be the darkest game world I've ever played. There's little to no moonlight, and worst of all, Danny doesn't have a torch. Well, actually she does, but that only comes on when entering caves. There's no way to activate the torch independently. Regrettably, all the hard work to bring Yara to life is wasted when character models look decidedly, actually more akin to the PS3 era models. Not all of them. In fact, it's only the women or men without facial hair. I can only assume that adding facial hair to male characters allow the waxy and stiff models to be hidden for the most part. I'll roll some footage of a particularly horrific scene that really just had me laughing and crying a little. This is always the crux of any open world game. Realistic character models, or at the very least, character models that don't look like they've been transported from a decades old game. Ubisoft, who are undoubtedly the biggest addicts to the open world drug, are fast approaching a precipice, and will soon need to address the many glaring issues with their game design techniques. Character models are but one symptom of a bigger disease. The amount of boring, bloated side activities is a far more egregious crime to forgive, especially in 2021. Make no mistake, you'll be spending the majority of your time in Yara performing slight variations of the same task. Clear a checkpoint, clear out an army base, clear out an area to loot a chest, clear out an air defense turret. And like trying to explain the dark web to your parents, eventually you'll just give up. The core issue with every side quest and side activity in any open world game is stopping the player from asking themselves why. Why am I clearing out this checkpoint? Why am I clearing this area out? Why am I doing this? Why am I doing that? And once a player begins to ask why, your game will have a hard time winning that player back as your side content transforms into a chore. Good open world design will stop the player from ever asking this question simply by hiding any menial task behind interesting characters or set pieces. Take The Witcher 3 for example. In Far Cry 6, you're handed so many of these side activities. Every time you fast travel to a camp or checkpoint, another NPC will be there, the same male or female character model, waiting to tell you about another convoy or another checkpoint ready and waiting for you.
Tell me what you know.
Danny, our lookout spotted a convoy that circles the river in the middle of Esperanza.
Apparently F&D storage hub is low on staff. Practically begging for us to raid the place, no? You got something for me?
Word has it some rich Yankees came through here recently, looking for treasure. It sounds ridiculous, no? They started their expedition in Concepcion. If you
They put a fucking anti-aircraft cannon on my family's land. I'll mark it on your map. I appreciate it. You got guerrilla. The army's got a checkpoint, and it's cutting off one of our supply routes. Taking it out would be a big help to the cause. Appreciate it. Appreciate it. Appreciate it.
It's Ubisoft busy work at its very worst. I mentioned The Witcher 3, and one of the many reasons it was so highly praised was the meaningful side content. Sure, there were fetch quests, but these were hidden behind unique stories and encounters while rewarding players with meaningful gear and progression. Speaking of gear, let's talk about chests. You'll be looting a lot of chests in Far Cry 6, chests from either FND or Libertad. Each of these will result in either a new weapon, new piece of gear, or weapon mod materials. But when the gear sets aren't worth it, at least the vast majority aren't, and the weapons are redundant, as you'll probably end up sticking to the same weapons you find at the very start of your playthrough, while the mods are honestly rubbish, soon you'll figure out that these chests are inane, and then you, the player, are beginning to pull at the threads of the game. The weapons and gear you find have rank, the majority of which are rank 2 or 3, and there are a few rank 4 lying around Yara. Most of these are hidden in tougher areas of the map or hidden in certain missions, but once you access the entire world map from the moment you finish the tutorial island, and with the arsenal menu actually showing you where each weapon can be found, within the first 3 hours of gameplay you can have an assortment of high rank weapons before you've even finished the first real story mission. Weapons, with the exemption of the unique guns and resolver weapons, can be modded, which for some reason always needs gunpowder, a resource that is drip fed to you at an alarmingly slow manner, and I'm fairly sure it's to hide the weak assortment of mods that you can actually install, mods that can offer a slight boost to a gun's performance. Then there's the mods for the Supremo weapons that are in no short terms woeful. Honestly, I never changed the mods for these weapons because they really don't mean anything. You can have a mod that gives your sniper rifle more body damage or better reload speed, or a mod that gives you slightly more stamina. 95% of them were honestly weak in design and implementation. There were only a couple of these that offered a truly beneficial upgrade to Danny. For example, one allowed for faster health regen and another gave Danny the option to heal a second time. As for the Supremos themselves, there are a few to choose from, like an EMP or first aid variant, but I rarely felt the need to change from the rocket launcher Supremo, as it's the best overall and it's the first one you're ever given. There's also an assortment of charms for your weapon, something I thought would actually replace the perk mechanics from previous entries, but no, they don't do anything, literally they're decoration. Honestly, what's the bloody point? Gear has bonuses too, such as offering the player high resistance to fire damage, being able to see NPCs in the dark, or damage resistant to bullet types, and so on and so on. Equipping the full set of any gear will give Danny the full gear bonus, but really, I ended up equipping different items from different sets. This will still provide enough of a bonus that one complete set won't outperform my hybrid build. A nice touch is that you can mod the appearance of any gear or gun to your liking. I really appreciate this addition, and it's something that every game should offer. Nothing worse than having gear that looks good but isn't able to keep up with the game's difficulty.
Don't look like no guerrilla to me. All I see is a tourist.
Progression in Far Cry 6 is its fundamental flaw. When the playable character starts the game as a badass, you're no longer a fish out of water fighting for survival. Instead, you're ex-military, and with that, the player is subliminally starting at the end of the story. Combined with a lack of meaningful gear progression or loadout customization, your game is on a slippery slope to mediocrity. Additionally, the perk system from previous Far Cry entries has been removed, further taking away from a personalized experience. A mechanic that is decidedly Far Cry. Let's talk about dying. Player death. It's often tricky to balance, especially in first-person shooters. How do you balance gameplay if a player dies mid-mission, for example? Well, Ubisoft have decided to sidestep this issue entirely. When you die in the open world, it's not very often you have to retrace your steps, as the autosave is quite generous. But if you die in the middle of clearing out a base, after carefully tagging all the enemies and taking a headshot here or there, well, that's too bad for you, because you'll respawn several minutes before entering the restricted area and have to begin the tagging process all over again. Far Cry 6 seems to actively punish stealth gameplay. This ties back into my earlier thoughts on the AI. When taking out an enemy with a sniper rifle, this will alert all other soldiers and have them Naruto running your way. There's also the issue of dying itself. Sometimes, for reasons, you'll be knocked down and be crawling around waiting to be revived by an NPC or player if you're playing co-op. But in my playthrough, I was never once revived by an NPC. They would walk over to me, but nothing would happen, and there's no option to give up. So Danny was left slowly crawling around waiting to bleed out. So we did touch upon Ubisoft bloat earlier, and I'm going to speak about it a little bit more, this time highlighting the new addition of the base building mechanic. It's incredibly simple. It has you adding new factions to the 3 main guerrilla encampments in each of the major regions of Yara. You're only allowed 2 of these factions per encampment, and they can be upgraded from the resources you collect throughout the world. Each faction offers their own bonuses, from the Hunter's Lodge that eventually allows you to kill animals with any weapon and not damage the meat, to the Guerrilla Hideout faction that allows you to purchase maps of hideouts spread all across Yara, effectively allowing you to fast travel to almost every area of the map. Pro gamer tip here, getting those hideout maps as soon as you can will allow you to get those high rank weapons I mentioned earlier, incredibly quickly. It's hard to deny the minimal benefit these factions bring to the gameplay experience, and it's the best evidence regarding the biggest issues players have with modern open world Ubisoft titles. Monotonous side content, underpinned by long stretches of nothingness. Even though the world around you is beautiful, when it's this empty, this lifeless, and this full of chore-like gameplay, you can't help but think of the better open world games you could be playing. Far Cry 6's exhausting, bloated gameplay is penultimately crowned by the Los Banditos operations. Here you send out NPCs on special missions to gain rewards that vary from pesos to resources. You have your leaders, each of which have their own specialty from sniping to surveying, and then you have your recruits that are the equivalent of the Star Trek red shirts. This is a great concept, and I was fairly excited in the beginning because I thought it might be similar to a tabletop style like mission structure, moving pieces around a grid map like a CRPG. But instead what we have is a series of menus with multiple choice options for how you carry out the operation. Each choice has a varying degree of success and can either increase your reward or decrease it depending on the chance of success and if you succeed. The strangest part about this minigame is that each mission is on a delay, meaning you will select a mission you want to pull off and then wait, sometimes up to 3 real-world hours before you can actually start the mission, which only takes about 30 seconds to complete. This begs the question, why include side content that is over so quickly? Chances are Ubisoft knew this too, otherwise they wouldn't have had these missions on such lengthy delays. This is padding at its laziest, or finest, I'm not sure which one. And it's a shame because they implemented the answer with the addition of the special ops missions. These separate missions task Danny with stealing various objects from a single location. It almost feels like the Los Banditos and special ops are 2 halves of a whole, and Ubisoft executives decided to separate them to increase the amount of content. Let me explain. In an alternate universe, you'd be sending your Los Banditos out on special operations, a la XCOM or Total War, strategically moving your units around a grid map to complete an objective and earn various rewards and cosmetics. Unfortunately, that universe isn't this universe, and in this universe, both of these side activities are nothing less than boring. There's an old saying in cooking, less is more, and this rings true for the video game industry as well. as the more ingredients you throw into a dish, the more confusing it becomes. And with video games, the more excess a game has, the quicker the player will experience burnout. Now, to even things out, let's talk about one of my favorite aspects of Far Cry 6, and that's the gunplay. In particular, the feedback from the guns. It's simply fantastic and utterly satisfying. The feedback from every shot packs a hefty punch and oomph that made even the most frustrating fights fun. I really enjoy playing as a sneaky boy, which in Far Cry generally leads to the old cock-up cascade, but nonetheless, the feeling of that sniper rifle kept me finding all the soldier encampments around the map just to nab a few headshots. The machine guns are great too, and the sound of the explosions were music to my ears. Speaking of music, the score is top notch. Now, in all fairness, I'm a wee bit biased because I love flamenco guitars and Latino music. Have a listen to Paco De Lucia for reference if you want some truly great music that will just amp you up. I can't recommend this late artist highly enough. Regardless, throughout your journey in Yarrow, the music will immediately liven up any disappointing moments you may be experiencing, while also lifting up the better sections of the game. Voice acting is also flawless, although the dialogue can often be cheesy and very predictable, especially for the guerrilla factions. There are also some truly insufferable characters you encounter, but luckily the villains do a great job of propping up the slack the protagonists leave behind.
Guapo, you listen. Rule 16. A guerrillero's revolution never ends. Always another war, another cantina, another ugly bartender. Elected a vision, a cure, a road to paradise. Viviro, created by our own brilliant scientists. The most effective treatment for cancer the world has ever seen. Grown within our precious tobacco. Modified with the purest fertilizer. Viviro is the key to...
Now there are two more topics I want to talk about with Far Cry 6. That is the vehicle handling and the accessibility options. Firstly, the vehicle handling. It's beyond shit. Not as bad as Far Cry 5, in fact it was the quad bike mission in Far Cry 5 that sent me into a rage, immediately followed by a big old uninstall. In Far Cry 6 there are options to toggle the handling of certain vehicle types, but overall it doesn't help a great deal, and I don't get why. I'll reference Cyberpunk 2077 again. The driving in that game was the worst I've ever experienced. Vehicle gameplay is something that Rockstar mastered over a decade ago, so when we have AAA studios presenting us with open world games involving large sections of nothingness, forcing us to use vehicles and then have said vehicles handle like we're simultaneously driving in mud and oil, it just frustrates the fucking shit out of me. One could argue that Ubisoft is aiming for realism in the way the vehicle types handle and move, but the counter argument to that is simply everything else in the video game. Without suspending your disbelief, every video game comes undone. So why does Ubisoft continue to aim for realism in a very non-realistic game? Lastly, to finish on a high, the accessibility options in Far Cry 6 are 110% worthy of praise, and it still shocks me that more games don't include more options for those who require assistance. I'm a big proponent of inclusion. A player shouldn't be excluded from a title because of a physical or mental need. The AAA gaming space has a long way to go before we as a community can be proud to say that everyone can play. But with studios like Ubisoft including more features than ever before, I feel comfortable in saying that the rest of the AAA gaming space isn't too far behind. More than ever, video game studios are being held to account for the products they deliver. World of Warcraft Reforged, the GTA trilogy, and Cyberpunk 2077 are extreme examples of broken games that brought together the collective gaming community and brought forth somewhat of a recrimination on companies that took advantage of their player base. Far Cry 6 is by no means in the same room as the aforementioned games, but Ubisoft as a studio is slowly approaching its own reprisal, with some of the biggest franchises in the industry and some of the least creative mindsets. Their games are becoming recognized for what they are. Poor reproductions of previously great series. focusing more on how long a player is engaged rather than the depth of their engagement. Unfortunately, video game companies do their research and know the longer a player is playing, the more likely they are to spend additional money on microtransactions, actively designing their games with the sunk cost fallacy as their core principle. Series such as Far Cry are slowly transforming into stretched out experiences, like a rubber band about to snap. And it's that snapback that companies like Ubisoft are afraid of, yet still refuse to change the way they make these games. Time is becoming an incredibly scarce resource for the vast majority of us, forcing us to choose games that may be shorter but will be more satisfying and engaging. Far Cry 6 is neither satisfying nor engaging, and in fact seems to exuberate in the ways it wastes the time of the player. This may not be Ubisoft's Cyberpunk 2077, but it's most definitely a sign that the fall of the once mighty studio may just be over the horizon. I can't recommend this game if you're a fan of the Far Cry series, as you can easily go back and play previous entries and have a better experience. My compliments aside, Far Cry 6 is boring, with zero progression for the player character and side activities that make doing your taxes seem like a trip to the beach. If you've never played a Far Cry game before, this may be a good starting spot, especially if you have nothing else to play at the moment, but only, and I mean only, if you can get it discounted. Do not pay full price for this game. In fact, I recommend buying a physical copy, if you can, just so you can put it towards a future trade-in. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. I really appreciate you spending your time here and watching this video. If you did like it, please leave a like or subscribe. If you didn't, then hit that dislike button just so I know how to cater videos towards you in the future. Anyway, stay safe out there. Thank you very much again, and we'll see you later.
What's this? Would be useful.